Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani along with Grant Turner. We are weighing in, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Mark Ostrander, GT, says he's on the train today, but I believe he's at the driving range getting ready for the golf outing on Friday prior to his son's wedding on Saturday. So he's sandbagging, right?
1,000%.
1,000%.
He's getting like a pro lesson or something. Like he's like, hey, I golfed in college. I just need a little bit of time.
Got to turn it over.
Like sure up my swing a little bit before I see all these people.
He's working on his left hand low for the putter. He's got a bunch of things working there.
For sure.
Actually, I think we're on the same team, so I should probably be happy that this is happening. I'm sure a few dollars are going to be exchanged, so I have my Venmo ready. I'm sure I'm going to be on the wrong end of it, but it is nice to be invited. I don't know if you've met Mark's son, but awesome guy, loves wrestling, grew up a Hawkeye fan. He's just a good dude, very successful lawyer in Chicago. Met us up when we had Beat the Street Chicago up there, and marrying a great gal. It'll be a fun weekend. So Mark, hit him straight today. Leave a few shots in the bag for us, and we'll see you on Friday morning. So anyway, all right. As we do always, we're going to look backwards and forwards, GT. Backwards, let's start with Fort Worth. I'm going to pull that up. And then as we're talking about that, what were your overall thoughts on I had a couple buddies that were coaching down there, and the general consensus, the thing that I heard over and over was just how good women's wrestling is at these lower age group levels and how it's improving by leaps and bounds. Is that you're a guy that sees this from 50,000 feet up? Do you agree with that consensus?
Yeah, I think, with the USA Wrestling developmental process, like with Jess Medina and, Terry Steiner, and then, basically getting those girls to get that exposure at the basically U15 championships, we're able to, bring home some people with some international prowess, and then that spreads kind of everywhere, right? So the amount of talent, and once again, the depth that we're accumulating is pretty rock star.
Yes.
I mean, especially at the collegiate level right now, and kind of the girls coming out of high school. Tons of talent, tons of potential. I really think that the U20 and U23 world teams are going to be stacked again.
Yeah, and what I'm going to say isn't a thunderbolt, but the fact that more and more states are sanctioning girls wrestling is obviously opportunity is where all this stuff starts, right? GT, if you don't have a chance at the lower level, it's going to be almost impossible to be good at the upper level. So Missouri has so many schools with girls wrestling now. It has been one class, and I think there's a proposal to actually make it 2 classes. So that growth is phenomenal. Here's the U23 results. And right off the jump, we got a banger here, right? Valencia beating FAM, Grant.
Yeah, and then also that Shilson getting third at that weight. Valencia beating, I believe, Ncaa national champion Nina Pham. Putting up some points, 19-8, 10 rip.
10 rip.
Good. Yeah, I mean that's a very, very talented field right there. Yeah, so that's big, something to take note of.
Yeah, Shilson battling back to take third, as the champion she is. Felicity Taylor, you pointed out to me, made multiple world teams. Is that correct?
Yep. So she just won the U.S. Open at the senior level, and then she's now won the U23 trials. Pretty dominant performance by her. She beat Alyssa Lampy in the finals out at the Open. So great couple of tournaments for her this past season. This past couple of months.
Yeah. Hauk goes 6-2, 7-0 in the finals. Nicole Moore wins 2 matches, 2 tech falls. Brendan Reyna from World Class Athletic Program, WCAP, 2 techs. Macy Kilty just smashing people as usual. So she wins 62s. Ortega wins 65s. Luciano wins 68. Lydia Krause, I think, actually wrestled in my Michigan Border Brawl. She's really good. So if that girl beat her pin in 10-0, she's really good, obviously. And Amina Lore, super high level girl, wins 10-0, 11-0, 10-0, excuse me. And, close it out at 76. Let's see if we can pull up the under 20s here. I believe, let's see, I think we have it here. Here's the under 17s. I know those are in here.
Yeah, I think that'll be all of them.
Okay. So Valdez, 40 kilos. That's like 88 pounds. So looks like they had a close first match and then a tech fall round robin finished it out. Is there a couple names or two here that people should be keeping an eye on? Is Gabriella Gomez, is that related to Austin?
I believe so. She's a beast.
Bloodlines, right? Well, her sister wrestles for you guys, right?
Yep.
Okay. Ava Ward is a Missouri girl. I know her. So if Jimenez beat her 6-0, 4-0, she's really good. Elena Valdez, that's another hammer, right?
Yep.
I think people should just take note of these results and try to go ahead. Sorry.
I think this is also kind of a I don't want to call it maybe like the Big Tens prior to Fargo, but like I think you should, try to recognize some of these names prior to, July. It gives you kind of that kind of into it like stat line piece, just of some names to follow, some of the good states that you'll see here: Michigan, Illinois, California. Like, hey, follow those names as they kind of come up through the path and be like, oh, okay, well, she was at, whatever it is, the trials in Texas, and all of a sudden she's national champ or All-American. We're creating a little bit more of a storyline if you follow women's wrestling. It's really good to kind of see that progression as they come up through, the ranking system as, U17, U20, U23, senior. Always just gives you a good opportunity to kind of see the next gen as they come up.
It's a great point. Storylines matter. I think that's what college wrestling does so well. It's like what college football does for the NFL. Like, we were in Vegas last week, I think, near the draft and all that stuff. And it's like, okay, who's taking the running back from Iowa State as an example? Like, oh, the Jets got him, man. That guy's going to step in and be, a 1,000-yard rusher, 60 receptions kind of guy. Like, who's going to get this offensive lineman or this defensive lineman? And it's because we've seen them play. And so it does take a little more time to do your homework, on these younger girls, especially because there's no college, Division I prominent level yet. But it is good to be more educated. Like, I actually had a conference call yesterday with Zach Randall and Hardell Moore from Oklahoma about junior duels. And we're going to do a couple of podcasts to try to publicize. We do one each on the women and the men's and a version of Matt Chat. I guess I should say boys and girls at that age, so excuse me. And then we're going to do a summary podcast at the end of the day, kind of a review preview kind of thing. But it'll help make me a better observer, like, okay, because the junior duels are all based on, the seeding is based on points, and the points is based on what you've accomplished. And so, like, hey, we got to get Grant Turner on this team. That guy won Fargo last year. Like, he's worth X amount of points. And so I think that's a really cool thing for people to understand. And, you can follow it more intelligently, especially the chaos of Fargo, where it's so crazy. And even junior duels is a different kind of crazy. There's 24 mats going at once. It's a lot easier to know where Team Iowa or Team Missouri are, for example, but, the same thing. So let's talk a little bit about Pan Ams. So we'll go here. So these are the results. So we'll start how they have it. Greco, U.S. wins. Cuba was third. So I'm guessing GT Cuba didn't send a lot of their A team. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think they just sent is what they could.
Okay.
Now, to Mark's credit, off the last podcast that we were able to talk about, we don't have a closure to Mark's rumor mill story of the Cuban athlete defecting in the country of Mexico. So just want to make sure that all the people know.
Yeah. Mark normally throws curveballs that we talk about ahead of time.
Right.
Him curveballing us was a unique one that we may not want to do again, but it was good.
Just all good.
Yeah, U.S. wins the team title. Brady Kuntz wins gold. Random Miranda wins gold. Sam Jones apparently just one match wins gold. Hayden Tuma goes 1-1. Pat Smith wins gold. Rayvon gets a bronze. Cunningham bronze. Carlson 0-1. Boykin bronze. Farmer 0-2. The thing that struck me the most odd, or I guess notable in the Greco GT, was Nestor Taffer is now wrestling Greco as well. Is that right?
He did wrestle 82 in Greco. It could have been that very similar to like a provisor wrestling freestyle at Pan Am's. Maybe their 82 kilo guy was hurt and they needed to qualify that weight class because the guy's hurt in order to go to Worlds. Yeah. I mean, once again, if you're going to make the trip,
yeah, get your matches in, right?
Be like, hey man, we need to qualify this weight. We need to send somebody.
And my understanding is a country had to weigh somebody in here in order to qualify for the World Championships. The qualifications are much less stringent for the Worlds than for the Olympics. Am I explaining that correctly?
Yeah, it's very similar. Like, if you go to Big Tens, you got to weigh in order to even be in the running. I believe there was somebody that missed weight in the collegiate season where hey, listen, you're not even in the bracket. So we can't give you a wild card. We can't give you a nod because you didn't make weight.
Yeah.
So that was what happened with Zane. So Zane goes at 70 kg, weighs in, but had an illness and did not compete.
Okay, so he was sick like somewhere between when he said he was going to be on the team and when the first round was, but went ahead and made weight so we could actually wrestle that weight at the World Championships, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So we'll get there in a second. Women win. Hildy goes gold. So Don Parrish had to win gold here, right? She won all of her matches?
Yep.
Okay.
She's champ.
Yep. Jakara loses to the Canadian in the finals 8-5. Cam takes fifth, goes 1-2. XMP bronze, went 0-2. So Kayla Miracle, I saw this result. I had to go look it up. And essentially defaulted out in the finals. So, didn't take a real loss per se, right?
Yep.
Okay. Forrest smashing people. She really looks like she's jumped levels, GT.
She looks great. She's got a great training situation down there in Arizona. Loves where she's training at right now. But yeah, she looks really good at 65.
Yeah, and I saw some social pictures. She is jacked. Like I saw her in Vegas, but wearing sweats, it's kind of hard to tell. But she's freaking ripped. Boyd goes 0-1. Grody wins gold. Diamond Guilford wins gold. Good win, especially for Diamond, kind of filling in for us up there at the top, where we've had so much success with Adeline. So,
and that was not an easy weight. Acosta, she's an Olympian. She's multiple-time world team member for Venezuela. Not listed in that weight class is Justina D'Estasio from Canada, world champion at 72 kg. Yeah, I mean, once again, great performance by Diamond. Also, Skylar looked really good. She won U.S. Open and also Pan Am's. So huge couple of weeks for her, very similar to like kind of a Felicity Taylor run.
Yeah.
Winning the Open, now winning U23s. But yeah, for Skylar to go and get the nod at Pan Am's, Pan Am champ at 72, looked really good doing it. I watched Alara wrestle. She's right there. Just, once again, getting an opportunity at that weight class for her to compete in the Pan American Championships was a great opportunity for her, rather than maybe going to the Open or the U23s. So really good run by Team USA for the women's side.
Well, and we get spoiled like these people, men, women, freestyle, Greco, a lot of them just step right in and win like right off the jump. But a lot of times it's much more realistic to think, hey, a person goes to a tournament the first time, they got some butterflies, they maybe don't win it, they learn a lot, that's a valuable experience, and then they come back, better than ever. But Guilford, 3 of the 4 matches completely dominated. So that's even more impressive given the field, like you were saying. Men's freestyle, U.S. mopped up. Gilman gets O-dub. I'm going to start saying it like you say, GT, 11 rip. Is that the right way to say it?
Yeah, that's the best way to say it.
Okay, 11 rip, fall. Dayton goes 10 rip, 11 rip. McKenna beats Rivera in the finals. That's, 10-0. And then a 13-5 and another 10 rip. Zane, as we talked about, weighed in, which is important because as we talked about on the air, that weight class is completely in flux in America with JG being gone. Dake goes 12-1, 10 rip, and then 10-1 against Gomez, which is really impressive. JB doing JB things, 3 techs and a pin. Zahid with a really good win over the Cuban in the finals. Jaden, your guy, goes 32-0 in the tournament. Snyder goes 33-1. And then Gwiz, really the only real loss America had against Desi. So kind of what were your thoughts there on what's going on?
The men's freestyle currently right now, I mean, they're, one of the best teams in the world in freestyle. And, having basically one weight class not compete and still score 229 points, it's pretty legit. And we sent, guys that are potentially world team members or our previous world team members at almost all of the weight classes. I just think that Team USA has got it figured out right now. We got some great guys that have stuck around. And once again, keeping those guys in the fold has been really cool to see.
Yeah, for sure. So the other thing that's coming up this weekend is the Last Chance tournament. So for people that don't understand this, the original process is you go to the U.S. Open, and if you place in a certain amount, then you qualify for the World Team Trials. There's other people that have qualified for the World Team Trials based on previous tournaments, NCAA included. But if you haven't qualified, and there's some interesting people that haven't, like an Isaiah Martinez and Nate Jackson, we'll look at that list here in a minute, then the Last Chance is literally the last chance to get into the World Team Trials. The World Team Trials, where I'm sure I owe Grant a plate of wings for some foolish bet I've made somewhere along the way.
Yep.
Apparently age before beauty is not a thing here. So age opposed to beauty is applicable, but just no respect for it. The World Team Trials are in Coralville next weekend, and that will set Final X. As we've said previously, there are several members, especially in men's and women's freestyle, and then Giangelo Hancock and Greco, that are sitting to Final X already. And they're, especially on the men's side, they're the familiar names. I think it's 7 of them: Gilman, Dayton, Dake, JB, DT, Jaden, Snyder, and not Gwiz, not 65, and not 70. So, I actually talked to Luke Becker this morning, and he said that Gable actually wanted to wrestle in Final X, but that couldn't work it out with the WWE. So that's interesting to, you don't know about any of these high-level deals, GT, so I'll fill you in because,
I appreciate that.
You wallow in ignorance when it comes to that side. I couldn't even stick the landing. So
yeah, I get you.
So it was interesting to hear that, though. I thought that was cool, that he's still interested in competing. So here's the list on Final X and under men's freestyle. I mean, there's a bunch of people you haven't heard of, but like Bianchi, Colin Shriver, Shelton Mack, former Pan Am team member, Sammy Alvarez. I want to come back in my next life as Peter Hammer, by the way. So if we can make that happen, that'd be great. Josh Saunders, Christian Montserrat, Jared Verclaren, former world team member, Julian Ramirez from Spartan, Mike O'Malley, Muhammad McBride, Imar, as we talked about, Devin Skatska, Lafragola, Chris Foca, Nate Jackson's a huge name. At one point in the world, one point he was actually ranked #1 in the world briefly, like after the Pan Ams a couple years ago. I don't know what Cougar Wrestling Club is now. Do you know what that is, GT?
Nope.
Okay. Jacob Cardenas, Derek White, another massive human being, Luis Fernandez. And then Flo's done a nice job of pointing out some big names that haven't qualified yet. Rotundo, Latona. You can kind of see this list. Ja'Cory Teemer is one that, stands out as a guy that's medaled at age group. Yaya, Gomez. I mean, the college names people are really familiar with. So this tournament, you have to make the finals? Is that right, GT?
I believe you have to either make the finals or win it.
Okay.
Because they added some more of the collegiate like people that have placed top 3, I believe at NC2As and or whatever, NAIs, JUCOs, D3s, all of it, in order to qualify for the trials. So you have the ability to add participants there. And then, of course, I believe the last chance qualifier being that last opportunity for you to compete to get the opportunity to go to World Team Trials.
Yeah, and Atlantic City is the host of that. So in my order, I skipped something. GT, I saw your tweet, so I want to talk about this. You said America is winning men's and women's freestyle this fall. Now, you and I, to be fair, people should know this. You and I have been friends a pretty long time before we ever started podcasting. You're a guy I pick your brain a lot about. Hopefully once in a while I give you a nugget or two, but you have a very good perspective of things. You are not a prisoner of the moment. So that tweet was very intriguing to me because you're a guy that literally sort of knows the world landscape. Tell me why we are beating Russia in men's and Japan in women's.
Well, I do not believe Russia will be able to compete in Serbia.
Okay.
So, or Belarus.
Okay.
So when I basically tweeted that out, I believe it's going to come down to the Iranians and us for men's freestyle. The Iranians are extremely talented. They have a great group right now. But I feel like on the men's freestyle side, we could potentially have 5 champs.
So I'll guess who the 5 champs are. I'm going to guess, and then I might have to delete one. Gilman, Fix, Dake, Burrows, DT, Jaden Snyder. So that's 7. So I'm guessing you're taking Dayton out, and you're taking, I don't know, who's the other one you would be taking out?
So
or just the law of large numbers, we're not going to win all those matches kind of thing.
Right. I mean, once again, these are the world championships. So I think potentially out of whatever the 8 to 10 guys that I feel like could medal, once again, barring any sort of things, because regardless of whatever we're going to have as a country at 70 kg, it's going to be a new person.
Yes.
I mean, JG has been the gladiator upon gladiators for pretty much a decade at that weight. So whoever that person is going to have a great opportunity to seize a very good opportunity at the World Championships. But once again, that could be that's a wild card weight out of the whatever the 10 weight classes that we have.
It's the weight till we don't have somebody already sitting in Final X, right? Basically, like 65, 70, and 125. It would be a little foolish to say we're predicting somebody there to win a gold medal. That thing certainly isn't impossible, right? But just realistically, so the other 7 have all medaled, gold, silver, bronze at some level recently. And so, it makes sense. That's probably, 5. So, I mean, the part about Russia and Belarus was the part I hadn't thought of, because I'm like, wow, but it does make sense. And I mean, America's, won it a couple years ago on the Snyder match at the end and hadn't won it before that till like 1995, right? Am I right?
Yeah, so 2017 we won it, in 95 and then 93, I believe, the men's freestyle titles.
It's I mean, as somebody who gets to talk to Gary Abbott and then, the Rich Benders and, occasionally the Zaddicks and the Joe Russells, like the amount of full-time work they're pouring into this is awfully impressive. And it's an honor for guys like you and me to be this. Well, you're not a small cog because of Nike, but in terms of the podcast, to be the smallest of cogs in what USA Wrestling is doing, it's certainly a thing to be proud of. Anytime you're wearing something that has USA on it is meaningful. I got to wrestle like on a couple national teams overseas, and it's probably in wrestling the proudest moment of my life. And USA's, the fact that they're winning is another thing to obviously be proud of. So,
yeah. So
and the women,
I think the women, I think that, I think it's an opportunity for a lot of those girls, I would say women, in order to, because you're going to have a couple of, newbies, at 76, whoever it is, Adeline has been the mainstay there since, I believe, one world team where she took one year off. 72 will probably have a newer athlete there because Welker is out for this season. So previous world team member. Ncaa Stock, I think, can get back to rare form. She's a beast. She'll be in a good place. Forrest and Amber Bruntel look really great. I'm using them as two examples of international prowess, previous world team people. Not to say that anybody else wouldn't not necessarily make that weight class.
No, but Forrest feels like she's jumped levels. It feels like Hildebrandt is jumping levels. It feels like a couple. Kayla, didn't wrestle her best at the Olympics, but feels like she just mowed people down at the U.S. Open. I think she wrestled a total of like a minute 40 in the tournament. So it feels like some of those, again, and it's not girls, it's women or ladies, are hitting their stride. And again, we talk about this. You place in 22, that puts you in the final X of 23. You place in 23, you're in the Olympic trial finals. Like you can't just, it's hard to come out of the woodwork anymore. You got to run the gauntlet.
And I think also Jakara being back at 55 is going to be a big thing for her, and her, basically, world championship status. I think 53, we have a lot of opportunity there. Helen, of course, she's an absolute monster internationally. As long as she, all of this is basically health oriented as well. So,
sure.
I just think that the U.S. is looking extremely good. We have a lot of depth, a lot of opportunities, and I just definitely think that it could be an opportunity where the U.S., seizes an opportunity and potentially wins in the freestyle area. Greco, I think, could be really good too, but I decided men's and women's freestyle would be where I'd focus on.
There you go. It seems like that women's team, they're really close, and maybe it's that more of them are training together, but like even at the Olympics, like you saw like somebody like Adeline come back and cheering loud, like demonstratively, I guess is the word I'm looking for, the other athletes. And that's a cool vibe. And, them doing the hearts and celebrating, it just, I think that's the coach's paradox, right? Like, hey, this meet's really important, but we can't treat it like it's really important. When you start treating it like it's super important, you tend to tighten up and not compete at your best. But you have to train like it's super important, so it's interesting. I don't know if you saw this. I just thought I'd throw it on our agenda because we had a few extra minutes before we get into this NIL stuff. Did you happen to see, and if not, I can fill you in on the Burroughs interview about who he thought would be challenging him at 79?
I did see the video.
So it's interesting, like he's sort of looking at the new guard, right? Like the Starachis and Makai Lewises of the world. And, Starachi sort of makes a lot of sense. Like I'm kind of wondering how Aaron Brooks, when he's going to pop out. I know Penn State's got an interesting dilemma because DT is, probably the poster child of that program, but in the Olympic champion and world runner up. But, I don't think Brooks is like planning on waiting till 28 to try to make a real run at the team. It's interesting. Like Burroughs is, first of all, he's a great wrestler. Second of all, he's a great ambassador. But third of all, it's one of the reasons why he's good at commentary. As somebody that does commentary, he's really good at succinctly explaining things in a way that most people can understand. Like you talked about, the young guys are not sort of cagey enough yet, like on the edge of the mat in some of those situations. Not that they can't win, but those are tricks you learn over time. And like JB, sort of the complete ultimate transformation of that, right? Like when he first came out, he didn't know a leg lace. I don't even know if he knowed leg lace defense or cut wrench defense at a very high level. He was just shooting shots and making sure he faced out and didn't get pushed out of bounds. And now, as you lose your fastball, you develop other pitches. And I'm not saying he's lost his double leg. Please don't. But as your fastball slows down a few miles per hour, maybe that's a better analogy. You learn these other pitches, and he is so crafty on the edge. It's like when he loses on the edge, it shocks you. Like when a Sidikoff beats him on the edge, it's shocking because he's so many times you see him get pushed and turn you around, or get pushed and be grounded, or get pushed and head pinch, or whatever the case may be. So we'll talk a lot about World Team Trials next weekend, or next week before next weekend. But I guess maybe just as a guy, again, that sees this a lot, there's going to be some really fascinating matchups, sort of old and new guard in some of these. I mean, we won't see JB at Final X, until Final X, excuse me, but there'll be a lot of these matches in the next couple of weeks that people should be really excited about, right?
Yeah, I think there's any of this opportunity for you to, like, one, be a participant at the World Team Trials is going to be there's going to be some great matchups, front side, back side, all of it. And I think what gets lost sometimes at these tournaments is, like, the Conci quarters or the Conci semis. Like, those matches are just as exciting as the finals, because some of those guys are, like 4-time All-Americans, 2-time national champions against other 2-time national champions, or it's crazy. Just the amount of wrestling and the amount of skill that is on the mat at those tournaments, heading into then Final X, which is the showcase. Hey, the 2 best guys battling it out, best 2 out of 3, New York and Stillwater. It's really cool to see. I mean, once again, if you're a nerd of wrestling and you want to do the deep dives like some of us like to do,
yeah,
then you can get into the seedings and who's going to have what in what round. And but I think the thing that's intriguing with JB's interview is how his ability to know the high level of wrestling and kind of see it in that next generation and kind of pinpoint where people can use their talents and see where they can come and being more dynamic is a very cool insight for JB to share with the world.
He's talked about not necessarily staying in coaching when his athletic career is done, and certainly he should do whatever makes him happy. But if he doesn't, that's a pretty great wrestling mind that we would lose to the business world, because I mean, he is sort of the antithesis of what I think people that would want to stereotype him as, you are just quick and athletic, and his mind is the opposite of that. Like, he knows how to win a slow, non-athletic match. Like, he knows all the tricks, he knows all the strategies, and he knows all the game plans. And I think that's probably the most underrated part of his game, because those are in the subtleties of what he's doing, where everybody's like, oh, hey, he's created a double leg, he's created a sweep, he's got a great back hamstring chase, he's got a really good leg lace. Like, those are the things that are pretty that's almost like the UFC guys when they go to the bar, they yell arm bar and triangle, right? Like, there's all the, I mean, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, bro, there's more moves. For real, there's more moves. So, that's okay, though. You're probably the same guy that calls him Royce, not Royce. So, you're fine. But yeah, his wrestling IQ, which is a term that gets, I guess, used a lot, but is really, really off the charts. So, last thing, NIL. So this is an article from Yahoo Sports on Monday. The Ncaa is trying to crack down on the current climate of NIL. The board of directors announced Monday it's issued a new guidance regarding the intersection between recruiting activities and name, image, likeness. They're specifically going to address the collectives, which are designed to pool funds together to attract top recruits. These groups are now deemed as boosters by the Ncaa, which is still attempting to enforce of the policy against pay for play. I think what's interesting is they sort of opened up Pandora's box, and the Ncaa is trying to then put the genie back in the bottle. Okay, like, But the NCAA did all this, and some people forget because they lost a Supreme Court decision unanimously that these athletes are allowed to get paid for their value. And it's super interesting. It's almost like, I'll make a different analogy. It's like the UFC, right? Like where there's a ton of complaint about fighter pay, but at the same time, the league is the league. Like if you want to be considered the best in the world, you have to fight in the UFC. Like you can't go fight in Bellator, Strikeforce in general and be considered the most dominant, the best athlete in the world because it's the best league. It's almost like baseball. If you're not in MLB, if you're playing in Japan or Cuba, you're probably, maybe you are great. We're just not going to acknowledge you as great. And so, and this sort of circles back, which I didn't mean to intend, but you had talked about storylines. Collegiate sports are so good at storylines because it's how they make their money. It's how they get ESPN contracts and things like that. And so, obviously you're in a different role in NIL because you represent a company that could potentially do NIL deals. And even if it's not in wrestling, like obviously Nike's a worldwide brand. There's Instagram models paying for your products instead of the other way around. What are your thoughts on the NCAA trying to sort of pull the reins back on the problem they caused?
I think there's a whole bunch to the NIL situation, depending upon institutions, the collective, the athlete itself getting paid, even like the pay for play aspect of it's like, well, you can bring in an athlete and it's like, hey, well, this donor wants him to come here. He's willing to pay him $500,000 in order for him to play wide receiver at Alabama. Not that that is a case. I'm just using that as an example. But, when you pay somebody like that kind of money for an athletic achievement, there's a lot that I think the NCAA didn't think of when they opened up this whole can of worms, and then also losing the court battle. I think that there's this whirlwind happened very quickly. Basically July to football, basically a 2-month window, and then all of a sudden athletes have 6-figure contracts representing companies like Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper, whatever, nationwide car insurance, whatever it may be. I don't know how they're going to be able to rein it in. And it may take a while in order to get conferences, schools, the collectives, all the agents to fall in line with an organization that kind of like let it run rampant for a while.
There's a whole nother option, which is the schools just cut away from the organization, which I think is like becomes more and more of a realistic possibility. Like the analogy I gave somebody the other day is, it's nice to think that kids obey their parents because they're all good kids and they love their mom and dad. But like I said to somebody, I go, hey, if your son made $25,000 a month playing video games and, you make $8,000 a month, I'm pretty sure you're not telling them when curfew is anymore. Like that's, like I said, like, look, I'll just go get an apartment, like I can pay cash, like I can DoorDash every meal. Like I can learn remotely. Like, the things, leverage creates relationships in life, like USA Wrestling, this is their podcast. So, we can't just go off and talk about a bunch of crazy topics and use foul language or things like that because we will no longer be on the air. And that's as it should be. In this case, we agree with that, but it's also, these are the rules. And, one person has the hammer or one organization has the hammer. And, I'm torn because I'm a capitalist, but wrestling benefits from socialism. Wrestling benefits from the money from the football and basketball programs being spread over the entire university athletic department. And people that only look at it one way don't get that. At the same time, I love seeing wrestling programs making deals with different organizations to stream their events, to generate more revenue on their own and inherently becoming less reliant on that other money. But at the end, like take Oklahoma University, which has had a premier football team, probably the premier. Oklahoma and Ohio State are probably the two premier football programs that also have wrestling programs. The amount of money that those programs bring in from like Mirikitani University coming in and getting mollywopped in front of 100,000 fans is astronomical to the university, and the wrestling team cannot replicate that. There's nobody going to, 100,000 people are not going to pay $3,000 for a suite ticket to watch a wrestling meet. Like, it's just, I'm not saying it'll never happen. I wish it was happening, but at this point, it's not happening. You know, the other side of the NIL stuff is, I think it would be foolhardy to think that these athletes have not been getting paid for years. It's now just more over the table instead of under the table. But, you know, to think that people are just going, you know, like people's dads are all of a sudden assistant, you know, the AAU basketball coach is now all of a sudden an assistant coach at the basketball team, that wasn't a package deal is just, I guess the kindest word I could use would be naive, right?
I think that, I mean, not to go completely down the rabbit hole, but there's been also tons of institutional, I would say, sanctions based off of like, hey, like all of a sudden I recruit a kid from Hawaii to Michigan and he doesn't have a winter jacket. And I'm like, hey, I want to buy him a winter jacket. And it's like, well, hey, that's considered to be whatever, like tampering or, you know, like
enticement or something like that. Yeah.
Right. I just think that there's level heads will prevail, and hopefully at some point in time it levels itself out, because it is so volatile right now between what's really happening and you know, what are the athletes, you know, able to do, when is their time, when can they represent themselves, when do they represent the university, how does that work, and then I think also, to your point, not being naive about how this is occurring.
Right.
And I think that as we look at it, and once again, we want to be fair. The rules are the rules. You want to figure out how that plays into the scenario. But I mean, to your point, also in a capitalistic view of athletics, you know, once again, there is a place for the smaller markets. There's a place for the bigger markets. And you as an athlete get to choose where you want to represent yourself. So there is a choice in all education, athletics, coaching staffs. The athlete still has the ability to choose where they want to go. It's not always all about money.
Right. And the starting quarterback is worth more than the backup kicker. And if they're both on a full ride, because there's 85 full rides in Division I, I think it sort of seems inherently unfair that the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback or running back is getting the same amount of compensation as the backup kicker that basically is just making sure the net's in place for the starting kicker, you know, so, and making sure the bench doesn't fly up at halftime, you know, so we're about out of our time. I have a feeling NIL will pop up again on the podcast periodically for sure as these things happen. So we will bid adieu by wishing Ben Ostrander a happy wedding this weekend. We're also going to wish that I make a couple 50-footers, because I don't think I'll hit it any closer than that. And try to keep my ball in the short grass and out of the water as much as possible. And as always, for Mark and Grant, I'm David. We really, really appreciate you guys watching, listening, and sharing. All the comments that we get are great. Thank you guys so much. We'll talk to y'all next week.